So when you're sketching the graph and trying to understand how to graph a quadratic formula, such as y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, when it's in this format, there are several things that you need to understand first and that you need to figure out first before you can even start to sketch the graph. The first thing that you need to figure out is you need to figure out what the axis of symmetry is. The axis of symmetry is found with the formula x equals a negative b divided by twice a. And remember, from up here, our b value is located right there, and our a value is located right there. So it's plugging those into those formulas. After you have been able to figure out what the axis of symmetry is, then you need to move on and use that value to figure out what the vertex is going to be. The vertex, the formula to figure out what the vertex is whatever you get for your axis of symmetry, you plug that into your equation, and what you get once you plug that in, the y value, is the y value of your vertex. So right here, this notation tends to be a little bit trying or a little bit difficult for students, but all that this notation up here, this f of b minus 2, or f of a negative b over 2a, all that this translates to is plug in the axis of symmetry into the equation to get the y value. That's all that means right there. So when you're sketching this out, that's what you're looking for. Now, once we get this, that y value is going to be the max or the min. So that y value is going to be, this y value that you figured out for, is going to be the max or the min. It's the max, it is the maximum value when your a value is less than 0, and it's your minimum value when your a value is greater than 0. And then the last thing that we need to calculate for, the last thing that we need to figure out before we can worry about graphing things, is we need to figure out what the y-intercept is. And the y-intercept is 0, whatever c is. So these are all the formulas that you need to have memorized in order to figure out, and in order to sketch the graph of a parabola, graph of a quadratic, when it's in that standard form. What we're going to do now is I want to show you an example that actually has some numbers in there so we can use those to better understand what's going on. So if we're given this quadratic right here, the first thing that you need to figure out is your axis of symmetry. And the axis of symmetry, remember the formula, is a negative b over 2a. That's our formula that we're going to use. And so our negative b value is a negative 4 divided by 2 times a negative 2. And this reduces to 4 over negative 4, which gives us a negative 1. And if you remember from the previous slide, or from the previous page that we had, we use that to help us calculate what the vertex is going to be. And the vertex x-coordinate is a negative 1. And now we need to figure out what the y value is going to be. And we do that by plugging this in. So we have y equals a negative 2 times a negative 1 squared minus 4 times a negative 1 plus 1. And if you notice here, whenever I plug a number in to an equation, I always surround that number in parentheses. This helps me to identify what's going on and makes it allows me to make sure that I'm doing the proper order of operations. So after I've done that, I go through, I calculate this. I've got a negative 2 times 1 plus 4 plus 1, which gives me negative 2 plus 4 plus 1, which gives me positive 3. So what that means is that my vertex is a negative 1, comma 3. Then I need to determine, is this going to be a maximum or is this going to be a minimum? Now, because my A value right here is a negative, what that lets me know is that I am going to have a maximum. And my maximum is always going to be my Y value of my vertex, so my maximum value is 3. And the last thing that I need to figure out before I go ahead and graph this is I need to figure out what my y-intercept is. And my y-intercept is 0, comma, and remember that it's always the c value of the given equation. So in this case I've got a positive 1, so my y-intercept is 0, comma 1. And now I can go ahead and sketch the graph. And in order to sketch the graph, you draw your axes. You've got your y-axis, you have your x-axis, and now we need to plot our points. So my first point that I am always going to plot is my vertex. My vertex, my vertex, my vertex. That is the first thing that you want to plot. So if I plot that, it's at a negative 1, positive 3, so 1, 2, 3. And that is the coordinates of my vertex. Then I plot my y-intercept. And my y-intercept occurs at this point right here, so that's what I need to plot. And so I'm going to plot the point 0, 1, which is right here. So what happens is I have half of my parabola right there. How I get the other half, how I graph the other half, is understanding that this line right here, this axis of symmetry that I solved for, this axis of symmetry that where I came up with x equals negative 1, what symmetry does, or what symmetry is it's when something is the same on one side as it is on the other. So since I know from my vertex I've got a point at this height and this far away from the middle of my graph, that line x equals a negative 1, what I can do is I can go over in the opposite direction that same distance and put a point at the exact same height. And by doing that I'm understanding what's going on with symmetry, and the other part of my graph is right down here. And now I've got my parabola. So that's how we sketch our graphs of our parabolas. I know it's not the most perfect graph in the world, but remember, it's just a sketch, and all we're looking for is all those important points that we were just able to calculate over here.